ouviu falar sobre tráfico humano? Hoje no Convite à Vida, exibiremos um documentário muito polêmico e importante que fala justamente sobre esse tema. Você não pode perder, é impressionante.
Conheça as igrejas da Convenção Batista Brasileira. São lugares acolhedores e transformadores, onde você se conecta com Deus e com uma família. Estamos de braços abertos para te receber. Entre em nosso site ou ligue pra gente. Nós esperamos você.
Se Deus tivesse uma geladeira, seu retrato estaria na porta. Ele lhe manda flores toda primavera e uma nova aurora a cada manhã. Sempre que você quiser conversar, ele estará pronto a ouvir. Aceite a realidade, ele é louco por você. Quando a vida está difícil, não conseguimos perceber o cuidado de Deus conosco, mas Max Lucado quer reacender essa esperança em seu coração com o livro Deus está com você. Sinta o toque e o carinho de Deus através das palavras de Max Lucado. Deus está com você. Adquira já o seu exemplar.
I was first introduced to the issue of human trafficking, hearing the story of a 15-year-old girl who was violently abducted from in front of her house and forced into sex slavery. I soon found that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a growing trend. As I learned more, I became deeply burdened over those trapped in this nightmarish existence. Determined to fight this great injustice, I set out with a couple friends on a journey across 4 continents to discover the reality of modern-day slavery. Our mission? To unveil the global sex industry, to expose the injustice hidden in the shadows, and to bring back the redemptive stories that inspire hope for true emancipation. My name is Benjamin Nolo, and this is Nefarious, Merchant of Souls.
Fostuse într-un bloc locativ din Belgrad. Proprietarul venea la noi și striga să ne pregătim, că vin cumpărătorii.
Nu sunteți gata! Fuck! Mișcați-vă! Mișcați-vă! Aleniți-vă! Hai că răpiți-vă!
Acești oameni puteau sosi la orice oră. Și noi trebuia să ne dăm hainele jos și să stăm în fața lor. Ne atingeau și ne examinau ca pe niște vite. Uneori ne duceau într-o cameră să vadă cum ne comportăm din punct de vedere sexual. Râs foarte mult atunci când au dus-o. Și îmi puteam aminti ca privirea speriată din ochii ei și lacrimile ce se curgeau pe obraz. Mi-este frică să-mi închid ochii când adorm, pentru că atunci când o fac, tot ce văd este durere. Văd fețele tuturor acelor bărbați și a proxinetului meu.
We went to Moldova first because we heard it was at the epicenter of the trafficking crisis. This is a country where 10% of the population has been trafficked. After the fall of communism in 1991, a severe economic collapse led to half of the entire adult working population leaving the country in search of work. We found that as people were abandoning the country, the children were just being left behind. This created a massive social orphan crisis. Many of these desperate children were winding up in orphanages where corruption runs rampant. We talked to investigative journalist Victor Malarick about this. He spent years in Eastern Europe documenting this crisis.
The serious problem here is that so many directors of orphanages and assistant directors of orphanages know that these girls are going to age out, and they tell traffickers who are waiting at the gates. But no one cares about the orphan, because no one knows.
We actually had a chance to meet up with a girl named Anka from a safe house for victims of human trafficking, and she explained what was happening from the inside.
Și spuneți o sumă mare de bani să grămădim și ne spuneți la fete că dacă voi vreți seara să ieșiți undeva să vă distrați, să spuneți că eu știu băieți care eu știu mulți băieți care, da, să plătească și nici n-ați vă atingă, tot să fie bine. Și pe urmă Oleg a aflat chestiile astea, că vinde fetele. Asta, după cât am aflat, eu i-o dat numărul lui Vasea, că eu aflat că noi suntem de la internat, fără părinți și nimeni n-are cine căuta.
The sad reality, particularly for young women or these young girls in orphanages, is they have no one. They existed in the institution, but once they leave the institution, they go into some kind of vortex and no one knows what happens to them. She's gone. She's disappeared. And you never see them again.
What we saw was that traffickers were setting up employment agencies to target these girls with false promises of legitimate work.
They tell them that they have modeling jobs for them, they have dancing jobs for them, or they have jobs for them in hotels and restaurants as waitresses or maids. And these women want to believe this. They need to believe this because they're desperate.
Cu ambele s-au comportat foarte frumos. Pe urmă, el odată ne-a întrebat pe noi dacă nu vrem să plecăm la Moscova. Și noi l-am întrebat să lucrăm acolo. El a zis că el lucrează, păzește un magazin, dar noi să lucrăm, îi trebuie să niște fete să lucrăm noi în magazin acolo. Da, ca vânzătoare și -ul. Dar nu-i trebuiau bani, atunci pe mine nu avea nici cine mă ajuta și îmi trebuia la examen. Și m-am gândit că poate și bine, dacă noi prindesem încredere între răsul. Dar eu tot timpul, eu îl întrebasem chiar pe dânsul, eu zic, Vasi, tu n-ai de gând acolo să mă duci și să mă avinzi de el și cu tine? Cum? Adică fetele astea lucrează acolo și n-aveau să spui că ceva se întâmplă sau... Să-ți placă acolo să vezi. Adică din vorbele lui. Și eu chiar m-am gândit că așa, eu am vrut să-mi fac viața, poate și cum.
Everybody wants a better life for themselves, so they sell you a better life. Oftentimes they come pouring in, unaware of the hell that they're going to be entering. Other times, they'll just look at a young woman and say, we want her, we know she's not going to come, of her own free will, so they'll abduct her.
Да, я сначала согласилась, потом передумала. Узнала о том, что если я туда поеду, могу обратно не вернуться. Когда я им сказала, что я передумала, они сказали, что все хорошо, чтобы я не переживала. После того, как они сказали эти слова, меня закрыли в квартиру в течение 3 дней, пока не был день. Они мне дали там в еду, в питье, там ставили таблетки, как бы не то что таблетки, а лекарства, чтобы я спала и чтобы не шумела. И я в один день пришла в себя, и я хотела убежать. Они меня как бы ударили и сказали, если я еще раз буду пытаться как бы этого сделать, то они знают, что со мной делать.
If a girl would try to scream and shout or something like that, I know that I would do my utmost to shut her up. You just think of how much money this girl can make me. And you don't care what she needs to go through in order to get it.
Organized crime is just anarchy. They don't recognize any authority whatsoever, any enforcement authority. They are a law unto themselves.
Since it's mafia, they know before you walk into that room and start seeing with your eyes how is it operated. They know where you live. They know where your parents work. They know if you have children. They know about your sisters, your brothers. They know everything about you. They don't leave nothing to chance. They're stone cold people. no emotions. You have to be like that if you want to do something in this world.
If they don't like you, they don't just kill you. They'll kill your wife, your children, your brothers, your sisters. And sometimes they'll let you live. And that's the way they work around the world. It's all an issue of fear and intimidation.
Aproape să ieșim din tren, el ne-a luat documentele, le-a pus la dus în geantă. Și Luda ne-a spus că eu n-am fost adus aici de Vase, că să lucrez în magazin, dar să lucrez cu fetele la tras, ca prostituată. Și eu n-aveam încotro.
These young women were abducted or tricked and brought to what they call breaking ground houses.
What are the breaking grounds? Could you describe that? What does that mean?
The breaking grounds are apartments and houses out of sight where the women and girls are brought to be what they call seasoned for the profession of prostitution. They are brought into these rooms and they are broken. Their bodies are broken, their spirits are broken, their souls are broken.
Cum ajungem și plângem, ei pe noi ne puneau să vedem cum bate fetele și spuneți că dacă voi să faceți altfel de greșeli, noi tot așa să ne comportăm și cu voi. Și noi puteau să ne bată de la nic, că ei cinsteau și intram în cameră și ne bateau. Pentru nic. Noi tot timpul stăteam cu frică, nu mâncam, știam că iar eu mă trebuie să-mi ducem, iar să bată cineva joc de mine, să scăpă. Eu când am auzit să mă la Vasea, că eu de grabă nu mă duc de acolo, eu credeam că
Sometimes at 3 o'clock at night, you get a phone call. There will be a car waiting for you in 10 minutes. You never know the location where they keep them. You walk into a room that is set up just like a fashion show. With a stage, you sit, you take your seat, lights go off, lights on the stage turn on. The girls walk on the stage, take their clothes off, and start moving around, just like a fashion show. And knowing that when this girl is on stage, that guy already has the next 2 years of her life planned. Sometimes the guy that buys them demands to test the merchandise. Nobody cares about these girls. They turned into an object. Just like you go into the market and you buy yourself a pair of underwear, you go into a different kind of market and you buy yourself a woman. It's hard for the first time or the second time, but you just get to a point where you just say, it's good money.
The girls explained to us how they were transported through these highly sophisticated networks that involved document forgers, smugglers, border officials, taxi cab drivers, all the way down to new owners awaiting them at their destination.
These guys, they take her passport. And these guys, they lock them in a room where they eat, sleep, have sex, everything in the same room. They get treated like dogs, worse than dogs, because they take their dogs out 3 times a day.
What happens if one of these girls wants to escape?
If she gets caught by the pimp, most probably she'll get a good beat up, stay in bed for about a week, and continue to work prostitution.
How do you run away? How does a woman who is from a small little farming village in Moldova finally finds herself in Berlin, doesn't speak German, but has known that in the entire time that she has been trafficked, there were immigration officials, there were border guards, there were customs officials and police officers all getting their hands greased with payoffs.
Fata, după câte am auzit de acolo, a fost legată, odată a încercat să fug și a fost dus în pădure de niște băieți și o legată de copac cu chelea goală. Și o legată-o de copac și o băteau joc de dânsa de acolo. Și întâmplător s-o dat drum, o fugit de acolo la dâns și a început să alergi pe tras și era cu chelea așa. Și mașina s-a oprit și a luat-o și a dus-o înapoi la seniori acolo. Patru în ochi. Și tot loc mă uit sau mă stăr mai mult între lume să mă țin, tot timp eu am impresia că mă urmărești. Eu chiar că stau aici, eu tot timp stau cu frică că ei să nu găsească și...
Să nu aflu unde
Da, eu tare mult mă tem de asta.
We couldn't fathom what a girl must go through that endures being trafficked. But we met up with a psychologist and longtime anti-trafficking advocate, Dan Allender, to get insight.
You must understand that exploited women are part of systems, mafias, pimps, control, again, manipulation. And the core of that is to break down further any sense of human dignity. It is a form not only of dehumanization, but it literally is bestial and making a woman into an animal.
So when you see these young women on the side streets of big capital cities like Paris and Milan and London and New York, what you see is a woman in total submission. She's going to listen to her master. She will never cross him. And what we see when we look at these women is the gaudy clothes, the cheap makeup, the stiletto heels, the come-hither smiles, and we just write them off as whores, prostitutes, that are not worth a moment of our pity or a moment of any thought.
Conheça as igrejas da Convenção Batista Brasileira. São lugares acolhedores e transformadores, onde você se conecta com Deus e com uma família. Estamos de braços abertos para te receber. Entre em nosso site ou ligue pra gente. Nós esperamos você.
Se Deus tivesse uma geladeira, seu retrato estaria na porta. Ele lhe manda flores toda primavera e uma nova aurora a cada manhã. Sempre que você quiser conversar, ele estará pronto a ouvir. Aceite a realidade, ele é louco por você. Quando a vida está difícil, não conseguimos perceber o cuidado de Deus conosco, mas Max Lucado quer reacender essa esperança em seu coração com o livro Deus está com você. Sinta o toque e o carinho de Deus através das palavras de Max Lucado. Deus está com você. Adquira já o seu exemplar.
Conheça as igrejas da Convenção Batista Brasileira. São lugares acolhedores e transformadores, onde você se conecta com Deus e com uma família. Estamos de braços abertos para te receber. Entre em nosso site ou ligue pra gente. Nós esperamos você.
I've been held hostage at gunpoint, raped, robbed, strangled, beaten up, everything by customers. So they're not all good.
Did you ever feel an element of fear from any of these girls?
Like they were afraid?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, several times I would feel that they were definitely afraid of what they were involved in, but they just had to do it. It's like a job. You know, most people don't like their job, but they have to go do it to pay their bills. So it became like a job to them, something they had to do.
Even the people who promote prostitution will put out helpful fact sheets on how to avoid getting killed. They don't say it exactly that way, but they put out a fact sheet that says, well, when you go into a hotel room when you're servicing a John, drop something on the floor and kick it under the bed so you can look under the bed and see if there's a gun or handcuffs there. Don't wear a scarf because that can be used to strangle you. Don't wear super high heels to an escort alcohol because you can't run fast enough. Now, this is information coming from people that are promoting prostitution as a good job.
One of the stats we dug up from prostitution research and education was that women in prostitution had a mortality rate that was 40 times higher than the national average. One predominant fact began to stand out to us. Peril is a basic fact of prostitution. But we wondered why anyone would endure the same abuses day after day when they could simply choose to leave prostitution at any time.
Why is it so difficult for girls to get out?
Because they're pimps. It's so difficult for girls to get out of it because they're brainwashed. And it's all that they've ever known. They feel like there's no help because there really isn't no help out there.
A woman generally doesn't get onto the streets without an ally, often called a pimp. And that person is controlling her, shaping, often providing her with drugs, but also with violence.
Every time that I got out of pocket, I got beat down for it. And we're talking like brutally beat, where I couldn't work.
I woke up to a gun being cocked in my mouth, you know, and it just scared me so bad. He had me call my family and say goodbye to them. And then, you know, I went back to him after a while because I felt like, you know, that's just who I'm supposed to be with. That's supposed to be, you know, this is what my life is.
No woman is on the streets because she just likes sex and or wants money. This is a system of utter manipulation. It's a system of exploitation, manipulation, threat, violence, but all fundamentally under the fear and deep sense of shame that I have no value.
He knew I was leaving a couple different times, and he'd come home and do this, I call it psychopath warfare, to get me to think that he was gonna kill me. Put guns in my mouth, put gun to my head, and said, I'm gonna do it, I'm in love with you. He would say, I'm so in love with you. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. And he'd put the gun in my head. And it's like, oh, no, don't kill yourself, I love you. Please don't do it to me. And you know, just the games, the psychological games were just incredible. And you know, when you're in love with someone, you fall for that. And some people say, well, you're stupid. No, really, when you're in it at the time, it makes sense.
You have what's called the Stockholm Syndrome, which implies that a victim can eventually come to identify with her captor when you've been taken captive. And your very survival depends on, in one sense, the care, loosely used, that word, the care of your captor. Then in some ways you bond to that captor, even if they at times literally torture you, violate you, demean your dignity. They're your only source of life.
She had a pimp who would say to her, unpredictably, down. And she would have to lay down in a certain spot in the room, just like a dog, until he told her she could get up. There's no reason for that except to demonstrate to the girl that he has absolute control over her. So that if he knows he can tell her down, he certainly can tell her, get out there, do not come back until you've got $1,000 cash in your hand.
I mean, the goal of the trafficker is to break you down so that you are under his control. That kind of power over a person leads you to a point where your only basis of survival feels like dissociation. And dissociation really is a flight from reality. It is a disconnection from engagement with the world around you. For the person who's been traumatized to levels of almost concentration camp cruelty, there is no way but to go more and more and more to the interior and to leave the exterior world for other people to control. It's almost as if the soul dwindles and literally gets more and more and more invisible.
Other techniques of mind control include the creation of a part of the personality that prostitutes, so that there might be Jeannie, who's the young woman who has a kid at home and girlfriends in high school, and then Veronica is the prostituting part. And because you can't prostitute without splitting part of the self psychologically, that Veronica is deliberately created by pimps. Pimps will say, I'm not talking to Jeannie right now, I want Veronica. Come on, get out here, Veronica. And so Veronica has a different look on the face, different clothes, different behaviors. And the child splits off that part of the self that has to prostitute for 6 or 8 or 10 hours.
And as a consequence, it's usually a 6 to 8 year period of time before she has AIDS, another sexually transmitted disease, or is literally killed. So it's not a long life these young girls have, but by the time they become 20, 21, 22, they are jaded beyond all comprehension.
I've got friends right now that don't even want to continue, that are working in the sex industry, that are so sad right now, that are so hooked on drugs, that are so devastated with why they've done what they've done. And all their tricks think they're having a great time. It's I would call it the greatest acting job in the world. The last stage of prostitution is absolute despair, depression, depravity, lost. You're at this tunnel with no vision, dead end, and you're like, where do I go from here? I've wrecked my whole life. And you realize everything that you thought that you could make from prostitution was just all like a mirage. It's like you were chasing it and chasing it and chasing it, but you never came to it.
Advocates of prostitution often employ the term choice to imply that those who are working in the industry are free and empowered. And on the surface, we saw girls who appeared to have chosen this lifestyle. But the more that we listened to their stories, the more we began to see a pattern that preceded this so-called choice.
Why do you think so many of them are winding up in that situation?
I think it's because a lot of them have my type of background. I've spoken, I suppose, I mean, it must have been on 100 girls, probably more, about their past and everything, and like nearly all of them has been sexually abused. In fact, I can't think of one that hasn't.
Sexual abuse is probably one of the core factors for how a woman gets onto the streets in a position of being exploited, and that's across the world. Abuse is a phenomena where in the US we're looking at 1 out of every 3 women, 1 out of every 4 men. But in terms of prostitution, you're looking at 95% of the people who are in those exploited positions have a prior history of being violated.
One pimp actually said, you know, I have to thank those dads. They're the ones that started her out in her training, and I just picked up where the dad or the stepdad or the neighbor left off. There's a lot of truth in that, a great deal of truth in that. The sexual abuse of children in the United States and in every other country is a horror that most of us fail to acknowledge and address. And it's not a stranger in a trench coat on the playground. It's a family member or a friend who's doing the sexual abusing.
This guy was actually living with us, and I got raped when I was 10 in my own house, in my bed. I feel like, you know, if somebody's gonna take it, might as well just give it up. It changed my whole life when that happened, you know? Like, it's crazy how one event can make your whole life just crumble.
That's where the child is taught what she's worth, which is not much. And that's where she's taught this is what she has to do in order to get the things all children want in life, which is love and affection.
When a young woman is abused in the context of her own family, and that could be in Nigeria, that could be in the United States, there is a sense of hopelessness and despair and shame that eventually brings a person to a point where they ultimately have no value for themselves and or for their body. As a consequence, they are so susceptible to the manipulation of others.
When I was about 5 years old, I was regularly abused by a family member who used to come home drunk, and often in a blackout he would get in bed with me thinking that I was my mother. When I was 14, a man offered me money, and I couldn't believe that somebody would actually pay for it when they could just take it from me, because I didn't think I owned my sexuality. I thought I was there for the taking. And for anybody to steal this from me was perfectly okay. And when somebody offered me money, I was like blown away. I mean, it wasn't a small amount of money, not to a 14-year-old, you know.
And that's how many children start in prostitution. The average age of entry into prostitution is 13 to 14 years in the US.
We came to the conclusion that there's really no way you can qualify a person's choice to enter prostitution when most have a background of sexual abuse and have entered prostitution underage. In most cases, from what we had seen, it wasn't so much an issue of girls choosing prostitution as it was prostitution choosing them.
In the last couple of years, 3 years actually, the anti-trafficking police, NGOs, 3 NGOs, have worked in SWIPOC, have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've rescued 1 girl. You know, people say education. If we just educate them, if we just get them good jobs, if we do development, well, hell, millions of dollars have been spent on both, and the situation continues to get worse. I mean, what proof do we need? Is education and development solved evil in the West? I mean, what has that done? Nothing. We have all the evidence in the world that education and money does not get rid of evil. It isn't a money and education issue. It's a moral, it's a spiritual issue.
What we began to realize was even a greater challenge than rescuing the girls was restoring them once they'd been rescued. In fact, we found that most girls, even after they've been rescued, still suffer with nightmares of their former life, which makes coping with everyday life pretty unbearable.
How many women do you know that have been brutally abused who never leave therapy? As a former pastor who did counseling, I can tell you most of the women continue in counseling the rest of their life. And they'll tell the story in detail, and they'll talk about it, but they're thinking. In thinking, really, you could change that word to faith. What they really believe doesn't change. And to really change that, it takes more than a counselor. It takes more than the words of a staff that's going to come alongside the girl and say, you're really good, this is good. Because remember, the world out there, the world they live in, are telling them they're trash.
What was really going on inside?
I hated myself. I hated myself so much, and I started to think that my mother was right about never accepting me like her daughter, that it was not worth it to live anymore. You know, there's only one thing what it does. It destroys your body, it destroys your life, your thoughts, your heart especially.
That's what you start to feel and truly spiritually believe in your heart, that you are just a whore, that you're just a prostitute, that you're no good, that as soon as you get older, as soon as you get fat, as soon as there's a wrinkle on your forehead, that no one's gonna want you. And regardless of you getting paid, no money is worth the disgrace and the shame and the destruction that it does to a woman's heart and soul. It is devastating, trust me.
I knew that there was something wrong. I felt almost subhuman, and I was very ashamed. I was frightened to tell anybody that I couldn't feel love, or I couldn't feel compassion or anything like that, you know, because I thought there was something wrong with me.
What was so tragic is that many of the girls who had been rescued were retreating back to prostitution just to regain a sense of normalcy.
Why a woman would choose to stay in a situation where she is being abused. Why is that? Even when they're offered alternatives, why? Why would they choose to stay? And I've often said that the abuse that we know is sometimes better than the future that we don't know.
We know by the statistics that you take a girl out of prostitution, 96 out of 100 within a year are back in it, unless deep, profound care over a lengthy period of time is provided to be able to begin to restore that sense of dignity and future for that child.
I'd rather like not ever do it again, because I felt like every time I sold my body to somebody, I was like selling my soul. Like every time I worked, it was just like, you know, a piece of me is going every single time, and I was tired of having that like empty feeling inside of my body, like inside of my body, you know, inside of my soul.
Let me tell you the story of one girl. For 2 months, every single day, this big, fat ex-Marine rapes this little 12-year-old girl. You know, she writes she writes her story as part of our therapy. She writes her story out, and she says how worthless she knew she was then. She said, I know I'm just a piece of garbage, and my life is ruined. And why does he do this to me? Why would he do this to me? Hopelessness is just like, it's such a weak word. Such a weak word for what she feels. It's beyond hopeless to, did you ever feel guilty about something you've done? Right, you never, and maybe sometime I felt really guilty before. Well, if you can imagine the worst you've ever felt for something, the very worst, multiply it by 10 and live like that for a year or two. Every day, feeling that pain and thinking that's what you're worth, that's what your life is, and not understanding how this could happen to you. How could this happen to me?
What type of emotions did you feel? What were you experiencing during that time?
Intense fear. Intense fear. A real rejection, of feeling totally unloved, unwanted, uncared for. I just felt totally lost within myself.
And so that's when the heavy, heavy cocaine abuse came in, and I just wanted to disappear. I remember just lighting that pipe and just looking forward to that hit. All of a sudden I heard my ears just ringing really loud, and like everything went black. Like my eyes just shut down. My eyes were wide open but went black, and I fell back, and I was having a heart attack. The pain in my chest was like, my heart was going, and it was like, I felt like somebody was stabbing me with a knife in my heart, but I couldn't see anything, and all I could remember was that, you know, there was nothing but blackness around me, and just, I realized, crap, I'm dying. I'm dying, and all I could remember is Jesus. That's all I could think about was God, and I saw my life literally flash before my eyes. And as I called upon his name, I just said, Jesus, Jesus, I'm alone. I'm sorry, and come and get me. Save me from myself. I'm sorry. And all I could do was like say sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was a prostitute. I was so ashamed. And the ambulance came. They took me in the hospital, and the doctor came over and said, do you know how lucky you are? You have a lot of drugs in your system, lady, and you're allergic to narcotics. And he's like, God's with you. And I knew that Jesus heard my prayer.
I was in such despair and desperation. I would really cry out to God, you know. And then one night, he appeared to me in a dream. I would go into this beautiful garden, and sat on the bench was the Lord Jesus. And I would go to him, we would sit, and we would just talk about, I don't even know what we spoke about, but he never, ever once condemned me.
I said, Jesus, I just want to see you. I want to know what you look like. I don't care about the movies I've seen. I just want to see you. I want to talk to you, want to see you. And so he granted my request. I had a dream of him one night. And he came to me, and he didn't look anything like any picture, any person I've ever seen before. He was the most handsome man I've ever seen, beautiful. And he came to me and went this close to my face and looked into my eyes and read me from a baby until my perfect age that I was, everything I've done. Didn't say a word to me and looked at me with love in his eyes like, I love you.
It was such beauty and such love that emanated from him. I was just, I fell at his feet. I was like a dead person. And believe me, at that particular point in my life, I wasn't scared of much, but I was, and it wasn't like a fear he's going to hit me. It was like who he was, who he really is. And I fell at his feet, and I just cried, and I said, Lord, I'm so sorry for what I've done. And when I got up, he'd say, Helena, I'm waiting for you. And it was so beautiful, so gentle. So gentle. And that went on for about 6 months. I was always waiting for him to say a harsh word or condemn me, but he didn't.
He said, I love you. You're healed, you're whole, you're delivered. And just like this fire was lit in me. And I just started to weep. And I just realized, God loves me. No matter what I've done, no matter all the mistakes I've made, no matter how many people I've hurt, he still loves me. And he can make something of my life.
To think that he took me, I was nothing. I was when he found me, I was laying in a bed. I hadn't had a bath for a year. I was covered in abscesses where I'd skin pop stuff, I'd missed veins, I'd cut myself. I was stinky, I was smelly, I was rotten. And he took me and he made me something beautiful. And to me, that is so wonderful. That is so worth giving my life to. And I just think he is so wonderful. And I don't want to stop talking about him because my heart just fills with joy. And I just want everybody to know about him. You know, I mean, it's just amazing.
You think he loves you?
Oh, I know he loves me. Yeah. Yeah, I know he loves me. And it's real.
He's jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me.
It's a happy ending to the story. Okay, she gets rescued. She comes to us. And she begins to realize that she is a child of God, that she's a princess, a daughter of the king. When she finished her therapy, she said, you know, she goes, now I know the truth about me. You know, God loves me, and I have so many people here who love me that there must be something good about me. And I know that if I just try hard, I will have a great future. That God will give me a great future no matter what happened in my past.
เป็นชีวิตและเป็นความจริงและเป็นความรักที่มั่นคงเป็นความรักที่บริสุทธิ์ความรักที่หาที่ไหนไม่ได้แล้ว
ชีวิตខ្ញុំរាល់ថ្ងៃមានមនុស្សដែលស្រឡាញ់ខ្ញុំម្នាក់ទៀតហើយស្រឡាញ់ខ្លាំងទៀតគឺព្រះជាម្ចាស់ស្រឡាញ់ខ្ញុំមានអារម្មណ៍ថាទ្រង់នៅក្បែរខ្ញុំជានិច្ច
Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he
God made it possible for me to get out of this world. He's loving me even though I was selling my body, even though I was destroying my body as many times as I could do at that moment. But His love is so unconditional and He still loves me every day.
Чтобы он устроил вот такую вот встречу, чтобы я встретилась с мамой, и он мне помог. И я верю в том, что действительно Бог есть, Он существует, и я знаю, что Он любит нас.
Heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest. I don't have time to maintain these regrets.
I'm ashamed that I used to be a person like that. I can't even call myself a person. It's sad. It's really, really sad. But God is bigger than that. I was captive of one thing, she was a captive of another thing. But God wants to set the captives free.
Yeah, He loves us. He loves us. He
Having reached the end of our journey, it became very clear that a new one was just beginning. Our eyes have been opened to our world in a way we have never seen it before. The people we met, the faces we saw, and the stories we heard have made us different and changed the course of our lives. We have been struck with a wound that we pray we never recover from. Famous abolitionist William Wilberforce once said, "If to be feeling alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, then I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large." In addition to his tireless legislative work, we looked at 3 things Wilberforce did that were so effective at combating slavery. Number 1 is prayer. He understood slavery to be a spiritual battle, and he paved the way for abolition through prayer. The second thing was awareness. He thrust the injustice of slavery into the conscience of a nation. Third, he gave money. He was a generous financial supporter of the efforts to combat slavery. The crisis of modern-day sex slavery does not need interested observers. It needs incurable fanatics.
Like drugs by the candlelight. The feeling's numb, but the pain's not gone. She holds her breath while they carry on. She fought real hard, she fought back then. Now she's giving up, now she's giving in. She's so confused, she's losing her mind. With love abused and twisted lies. They even change changed her name. They even changed her name. They even changed her just look what they did with it. Her price was high, but she's dealt the same. The lot of a slave that girl became. She feels like she has lost her soul. The breath in her lungs is growing cold. Rolling lines inside her head. They buried hope with the words they said. They even changed her name. They even changed her.
Convite à Vida termina por aqui, mas se você gostou desse programa e deseja compartilhar ou assistir novamente, acesse www.conviteavida.org.br. Até semana que vem com muitas outras novidades.